In the 1990s, Helen Hunt wasn't just a star. She was the girl next door who somehow owned the entire neighborhood. Hollywood was quite literally mad about her. She was a three-time Emmy winner who capped it all off with an Oscar for As Good as It Gets. A woman who could navigate a messy marriage on a sitcom and survive a terrifying tornado on the big screen in the same breath. But then, at the absolute summit of her power, the lights began to dim. It wasn't a career in decline or a loss of talent. It was a deliberate, quiet withdrawal from the machine. Tonight, we're looking at what actually happened to Helen Hunt. It's a journey of burnt retinas, million-dollar paychecks, and the radical decision to trade the red carpet for a pair of knitting needles. Helen Elizabeth Hunt was born on June 15, 1963, in Culver City, California, into a family where the craft wasn't just a passion, it was the household language. Her mother, Jane, was a photographer with a keen eye, and her father, Gordon Hunt, was a legendary acting coach and director who helped shape the voices of half of Hollywood. With an uncle who was a director and a grandmother who coached voices, Helen didn't just stumble into show business, she was born into the theater's inner sanctum. When she was just 3, the family moved to New York City, and while other kids were at the park, Helen was in the dark of a theater, watching plays several times a week. It was a baptism in high art that gave her a maturity most child actors only pretend to have. By 1973, at age 10, she was already on the payroll, making her debut in the television film Pioneer Woman. Unlike many overnight successes, Helen spent the next 2 decades as the industry's most reliable workhorse. She popped up as Murray Slaughter's daughter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and played George Siegel's daughter in the disaster flick Roller Coaster. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. A familiar face on The Bionic Woman, and even The Facts of Life, where she played a marijuana-smoking classmate. But her most infamous early moment came in the 1982 TV movie Desperate Lives. In a scene that would later become the stuff of Saturday Night Live monologues, a young Helen, playing a girl high on PCP, shattered a second-story window and jumped out. It was campy, it was wild, and it proved that even as a teenager, she wasn't afraid to go over the edge for a role. The mid-'80s saw her transition into the teen movie era, but the big screen breakthrough remained elusive. In 1985, she starred in the dance comedy Girls Just Want to Have Fun, alongside a young Sarah Jessica Parker and Shannon Doherty. They played best friends chasing a dream on a local dance show, but the film crashed at the box office, debuting in 10th place. Critics dismissed it, and the industry looked right past her. She kept grinding, playing the daughter of a woman on the brink of divorce in Francis Ford Coppola's Peggy Sue Got Married, and a research assistant teaching sign language to chimps in Project X opposite Matthew Broderick. Even as she shared the screen with heavyweights like Patrick Swayze and Liam Neeson in 1989's Next of Kin, or Jodie Foster in Stealing Home, Helen remained the reliable supporting player. By the dawn of the 90s, she had participated in over 50 projects, yet there wasn't a single hit to anchor her name. By 1992, the industry had spent nearly 20 years watching Helen Hunt work, but it was about to finally see her shine. It started with a little show called Mad About You. Paired with Paul Reiser, Helen stepped into the shoes of Jamie Buckman, and suddenly she wasn't just a familiar face on a guest list. She was the woman every man in America wanted to marry, and every woman wanted as a best friend. The chemistry between them was so effortless, it felt less like a sitcom and more like we were eavesdropping on a real marriage in a high-rent Manhattan apartment. Helen didn't just play Jamie, she inhabited her with a sharp, relatable wit that made the Emmy voters look like they were on a permanent loop. She nabbed her first nomination in 1993 and went on to win the trophy for Best Lead Actress 4 years in a row, starting in 1996. While the Friends cast were the trendy kids on the block, Helen was the undisputed queen of the network, and in 1998, she proved she was just as savvy in the boardroom as she was on camera. She and Reiser negotiated a historic pay raise that sent their salaries skyrocketing from $250,000 to a staggering $1 million per episode for the final season. In one single year, she netted over $22 million. But what made Helen different from her peers was her refusal to pull a David Caruso. While her Kiss of Death co-star famously walked away from a hit TV show only to watch his film career stall, Helen kept her day job at NBC while chasing tornadoes on the side. In 1996, she starred in the disaster epic Twister, a production that was as chaotic as the storms on screen. Director Jan de Bont was so intense that the camera crew actually quit mid-production, claiming he was out of control. Helen, the ultimate pro, took the brunt of it. To make the sky look dark during daytime shots, de Bont used high-powered electronic lamps that literally burned the retinas of Helen and co-star Bill Paxton, leaving them temporarily blind. She was hit in the head, suffered concussions, and was blamed by the director for her own injuries. But she stayed. She endured, and the result was a $500 million global smash that proved she was a genuine movie star who could survive anything, even her own director. Then came 1997. The explosion was massive. It was the year of the Titanic iceberg. But while Leo and Kate were sinking into the Atlantic, Helen Hunt was quietly anchoring one of the most beloved human stories ever put to film. She was cast as Carol Connolly in As Good as It Gets, playing a single mother and a waitress with just enough steel in her spine to handle the most obnoxious man in New York, Melvin Udall. Walking onto a set to lead a movie opposite Jack Nicholson is a suicide mission for most actors. Jack is a force of nature, a legend who carries the weight of a dozen masterpieces in his grin. At the time, Helen was 34, the sitcom girl from NBC, and she was stepping into the ring with a 60-year-old heavyweight. She later confessed that she was very nervous at first, walking into the project, expecting the wild version of Jack we all saw in the tabloids. But the reality of the experience didn't just meet her expectations, it completely rewrote them. She discovered that Jack wasn't just a star, he was a worker bee, just like her. He grew up in acting classes, sweating over the same questions of craft and intent that had occupied Helen since she was 10 years old. In a rare, candid look back during a 2018 interview with Variety, Helen shared a story from the makeup chair that perfectly captures the storm of working with a genius. One morning, the legend himself was having a moment of profound doubt, the kind only a true artist can feel. Jack was in the middle of a rant, terrified that he was going to be bad. He paused, looked at Helen, and said, "The only art I left is to not do that, to not go there." He was talking about the temptation to throw up your hands and give in to the fear of failure. That lesson, that none of us have the right to quit on a scene or a story, stayed with Helen for the rest of her life. She took that Jack wisdom and used it as her North Star, especially when working with younger actors who were intimidated by the machine. Though initially overshadowed at the box office by the Titanic juggernaut, As Good as It Gets proved that audiences were still hungry for people talking to each other and trying to love each other. It became a sleeper hit, eventually raking in over $300 million worldwide and earning 3 Academy Awards. Helen pulled off the impossible. She won the Oscar, the Golden Globe, and the SAG Award all in a single year, while still showing up at dawn to film her sitcom. By the time the calendar flipped to the year 2000, Helen Hunt wasn't just a movie star. She was the undisputed engine of the industry. In a single 12-month span, she released 4 major films that seemed to cover every corner of the American psyche. October was a doubleheader. She played one of the many women orbiting Richard Gere's wealthy gynecologist in Dr. Tea and the Women, and then pivoted sharply to the gritty, tear-soaked drama of Pay It Forward. Now, let's talk about Pay It Forward. It was clearly designed to be an Oscar juggernaut, pairing Helen with Kevin Spacey. She played the struggling alcoholic mother of a boy trying to change the world. The legendary Roger Ebert took a swipe at the film for being too emotionally manipulative, but even he couldn't help but highlight Helen's performance. She brought a raw, unwashed reality to a character that could have easily been a cliché. But if October was for the critics, December was for the bean counters. She starred in Nancy Meyers' What Women Want, opposite Mel Gibson and Robert Zemeckis' Castaway with Tom Hanks. Those 2 films alone brought in over $800 million. Helen was the woman every man in Hollywood was either trying to understand or desperately trying to get back to. She had reached a level of box office saturation that few actresses in history ever touched. In 2001, she worked with Woody Allen on The Curse of the Jade Scorpion, a production that offered a glimpse into the bizarre level of secrecy that still exists at the highest levels of film. Woody, notorious for keeping his scripts under lock and key, only allowed Helen to read the full screenplay in one single sitting while a courier waited outside her door. She had to finish it, hand it back immediately, and commit on the spot. It was the kind of high-stakes ego trip that stars of her magnitude usually tolerate in the name of art. But the film ended up being one of Allen's most expensive disappointments, grossing a paltry $7 million. For Helen, it was a signal that the golden era was shifting into something much less predictable. By 2004, she was pushing her boundaries even further in A Good Woman, attempting to play a 1930s femme fatale. Not everyone was convinced. The AV Club famously remarked that she looked embarrassingly out of place as a seductress. It was a rare sting for a woman used to universal acclaim. After a few quiet years focusing on her family and smaller projects like 2010's Every Day, which the LA Times praised as a reminder of her talent for understatement, Helen returned to the big screen in the 2011 hit Soul Surfer. Playing the mother of shark attack survivor Bethany Hamilton, she helped anchor a film that grossed double its production costs. But it was 2012 that provided the final thunderous proof that she was still a heavyweight. In The Sessions, Helen took on the role of sex surrogate Cheryl Cohen Green. It was a part that required full frontal nudity and an almost terrifying level of emotional transparency. Helen later admitted that while being naked was challenging, the real hurdle was the vulnerability of the character's journey. She didn't want to just play a part. She wanted to do right by the real woman she was portraying. The industry noticed. Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter noted that her performance was physically bold, but equally marked by its maturity and composure. It earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress, proving that even after decades in the trenches, after the burnt retinas of the 90s and the studio rejections of the aughts, Helen Hunt was still the most composed, most dangerous, and most capable woman in the room. As the new millennium progressed, the world began to wonder why the most decorated actress of the 90s was suddenly becoming a ghost in her own industry. The answer is as simple as it is radical. Helen Hunt stopped waiting for permission. In the wake of her Oscar win, she realized the dramedy, the very genre that made her a star, was being pushed aside by the Burbank bean counters in favor of louder, shallower spectacles. Instead of fighting for the scraps, she went behind the camera. She spent a decade of her life writing and adapting Then She Found Me, eventually directing and starring in it in 2007. She coaxes a pitch-perfect performance out of Bette Midler and proved that her worker bee discipline translated perfectly to the director's chair. She didn't just direct films. She became a staple of the prestige television renaissance, overseeing episodes of This Is Us, Revenge, and Feud. But the real reason Helen receded from the spotlight wasn't just a change in career, it was a change in heart. In May 2004, at the age of 41, she welcomed her daughter, McKenna Leigh. For a woman who had been a professional child soldier in the industry since she was 10 years old, the pull of the living room finally became stronger than the pull of the soundstage. She decided to trade the red carpet for a pair of knitting needles. There is that legendary interview from 2013 where she spent the entire time knitting a doll for McKenna while answering questions about her Oscar nomination for The Sessions. It was a quiet, powerful message to the world. I've already won your game. Now I'm playing mine. Her personal life during these years was a private, turbulent journey. Her 16-year relationship with producer Matthew Carnahan, which began in 2001, was a cycle of high-stakes devotion and painful distance. Reports surfaced of a bumpy road, with Matthew moving out and Helen taking him back multiple times before they finally called it quits in 2017. It was a long, complex goodbye that coincided with the heaviest loss of her life, the death of her father, Gordon Hunt, in 2016. Gordon was the man who had directed her through the simulation of birth on Mad About You, and losing him to Parkinson's was the closing of her most sacred chapter. She said of him, "If you asked 100 people who knew him, they'd all say he was the kindest man they ever knew." So, what actually happened to Helen Hunt? Nothing happened to her. She simply happened to herself. She realized that with the $22 million she cleared from the final season of Mad About You and her blockbuster residuals, she didn't have to be everywhere anymore. She could afford to be choosy. She could afford to be a mother. She could afford to be a director who only takes on projects that actually move the needle of her soul. Today, in 2026, we see a woman who has reclaimed her own narrative. She spends her days writing songs with her daughter and selecting roles, like her turn in Shots Fired, that speak to the world she wants to live in. Helen Hunt's legacy isn't just a cabinet full of Emmys and an Oscar. It's the blueprint for how to survive the hurricane of fame without losing your sense of self. She proved that being Hollywood royalty is nice, but being the master of your own time is the ultimate victory. She didn't fade away. She just stepped into a different light, one that she finally has the power to control. Watching a woman like Helen Hunt navigate the absolute summit of fame and then choose the quiet of a knitting needle over the roar of a red carpet makes you realize that sometimes the most radical move you can make is to simply stop running. If Helen's journey from a PCP-frenzied window jump to the serene halls of a director's booth touched that part of you that's also survived a few storms, give this video a thumbs up. It's how we keep this conversation going. And if you're the kind of soul who values the truth behind the trophy case, make sure to subscribe. We're here to uncover the real lives of the icons who raised us, one layer at a time. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Helen's decision to walk away was her greatest performance yet? Let's share some wisdom in the comments. After all, a good story is always better when shared with friends. Until next time, stay true to your own script.